Hello, my name is Andrew Thake. I'm a divisional director with Resourcing Tomorrow. I'm delighted to welcome Mark Cutifani, who, as well as being a member of our advisory board, is also chair of Vale Base Metals. Delighted to have you with us today, Mark.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to be here.
At a conference you spoke at recently, you talked about the danger of a grey tsunami enveloping the mining industry. What actions can the mining industry do to encourage more young people to pursue a career in mining?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think the most important thing for us to do is provide a social context for why mining is important. From what I've seen, and I've got lots of kids, and they all tell me mining doesn't quite fit into their view of what the world should be in the future. And when I ask them, where do you think the materials are going to come from? It's taken me a few years to explain to them how the world actually works. So making sure that people understand how important mining is, how it helps us reduce human footprint on the face of the planet and why it's net positive, environmentally net positive. Those sort of things are really important to help kids understand why we're important. And with that, in my view, will come a lot more interest in being part of an industry that I think is absolutely key.
And connected to that, you've said that mining needs to connect with next generation values such as transparency, shared prosperity, and responsible technology adoption. How is Vale Base Metals applying these values internally, and in what ways are you benchmarking progress?
Well, I think any business that I've been involved in has to be focused on transparency, working in the right way, involving local communities, understanding how we provide a sustainable business. When I say sustainable, I mean economically sustainable and all that comes with it, whether it's social or I should say safety and health, environment, social performance, and all of the things you would expect the business to deliver, which includes a 10 to 15% minimum return through the cycle. So for me, base metals or Vale Base Metals has been a metaphor for that same positioning for the industry. And that's why I joined, is they recognised the importance of improving their efficiencies, doing a lot better on the business returns front, but they also committed to making sure that we improve safety, our environmental performance, and did a lot more work on the social side, which I think is a really important point and is one that we need to continue to improve on.
You've also argued that miners must be smarter, not just bigger, to drive decarbonisation, pointing to innovations like hydrogen fuel hybrid haul trucks. What specific paths are Vale Base Metals pursuing to lead fleet innovation, tailings reduction, and renewable energy integration?
I think the way I describe it, and again, it's about all the businesses I've been involved in, is how do we reduce our footprints? And by that I mean, how do we reduce water consumption? So the Vale Base Metals coarse particle flotation, something we did at Anglo as well, reduces water consumption by up to 50%, depending on the site. Second thing, and I'm just using coarse particle flotation to demonstrate the point, 30% energy reduction in producing copper, so a much more efficient way of processing material. And in all of the things we do, how do we reduce our overall footprints? And how do we work with communities to make sure that the things we're doing actually suit what the community sees that it wants for itself? And I think that we can save a lot of money by connecting with communities and placing infrastructure in a way that communities get benefit, and at the same time make sure that we get approvals for the things we need. So there's a win-win in there. So always looking for those win-wins and looking at how we reduce our environmental footprints, I think ultimately helps reduce our operating costs and makes us more competitive on the way through.
You've emphasised that cool heads will prevail amid the US-Canada nickel trade tension. How is Vale Base Metals refining its contingency planning to ensure supply chain resilience if tariffs emerge? And what role do you see diplomatic efforts in playing in maintaining stability?
In the first instance, the most important people to us in these types of conversations are our customers. And so understanding what they need, what form they need the product, That's been really important to us, and our commitment to continue supplying them is key to, if you like, maintaining the right relationship with our customers. And at the same time, our customers then become our own champions for making sure that governments actually make the right sorts of decisions that support their own industries. And in our business, in nickel, we were the major supplier of nickel to the US industrial sector, in fact, a whole range of sectors, including low carbon type technologies, but copper and the other products we made. So building relationship with customers, making sure that they understood we're there for them, and having them work with us, with the government, to make sure that we come up with something that works and is sensible. I've always found that many politicians, not just some that we know quite well, will make the big statement, but then they're looking for people to work out how things should work in the detail. And we recognise that that's where we've got to work with our customers and all of the key stakeholders. And for us, so far, that's worked pretty well.
Changing tact, I'd like to ask you like a few questions about yourself. This is one of my favourite questions, which we always get great answers from our kind of various speakers at Resourcing Tomorrow. What is the one book that you've read that has most influenced your life?
The book that had the biggest impact on the way I thought about things, and probably more deeply, is a book called African Genesis by Robert Ardrey. And it's a book that explains probably our most basic needs and desires in terms of societies, and it goes beyond humans. It goes into the whole animal kingdom. And there were various books that followed called Territorial Imperative, and the last book that I think he did was Social Contract. And that sort of fits with my interest in human resources, my work on Requisite with Elliott Jacques, or the contemporaries of Elliott Jacques, systems leadership, Ian McDonald, the whole thing about how organisations come together and how people think and work and how we connect, both socially, most importantly, and then how work and what we do is in service of society. Those pieces are all really important. The book I most loved was Lord of the Rings, but that's a different conversation. But in its own way, humanity is represented, as are other forms of life. But again, in its own way, it's got some wonderful messages as well.
Next question. How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have a favourite failure of yours?
Well, firstly, I make the point that I'm a consistent failure, in that we all make mistakes, and so the list is as long as your arm, as my kids and my family could point out quite consistently. But what I'd like to think is I learn quick, and well, I do two things. Firstly, in analysing what the big issues are, try to make sure I understand what the main game is, and make sure that each key decision is a step on the way. And don't be scared of making decisions, but you've got to make them, and you've got to make them quick. And you know that in this sort of industry, you don't have all the information. The world is changing very quickly. You've got to make decisions, and you've got to know that those decisions will be wrong in some way, shape, or form, and be quick to react and adjust to the circumstance. So I made a decision to join a company many years back called Sons of Gwalior that had a hedge book that was out of the money, publicly $100 million. And within 3 months, we'd worked out it was actually 1.5 billion out of the money. So I spent the next 3 years recovering and working with a wonderful team in sorting that issue out. And we did. We kept the company afloat, and it was probably the most important time in learning about something that, I had exposure to financial issues, but when you're confronted with something like that is so specific, I got to know hedge books and a whole range of other things, and what we had to do to stay afloat was a real learning experience, and probably set me up as a future CEO. And I was a CEO at that time, but it was my first job at 40. I left the company, and the story has got a bit of a postscript. I left the company on the basis that I couldn't agree with the chairman on what steps were next. And I felt that what he was suggesting wouldn't work. I joined Inco. I took a role that was 2 levels lower, and I thought my career was over. As it turned out, that learning experience was probably the most important learning I'd had. Unfortunately, the company went under 18 months, so I ended up being right. But that was one of those times you wish you weren't right. But for me, it was the most important experience in my career.
And one last question. We've got a lot of students coming to this year's Resourcing Tomorrow. I know that you're very, very passionate about the future of the industry. Going back to my first question, what advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? And it's a double-barreled question. What advice should they ignore?
Firstly, commitment. And there's no better industry to join in terms of your ability to make a difference on the planet. And so be committed and be passionate about what you do, and argue for what you believe is right. At the same time, always stay open to a different perspective, a different view. And as I always say, one mouth, 2 ears, try and use them in that proportion, and you'll generally be on the right side of the conversation. Even if you're taking a contra view, if you believe it to be true, then fight for it. But at the same time, if someone puts something on the table that might change your view, nothing wrong with that. Be open to different ideas, different views, and you'll end up navigating pretty well.
Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure interviewing you. We look forward to seeing you at Resourcing Tomorrow. Thank you very much for your time.